On April 6, 2026, 4 astronauts inside the Orion spacecraft lost all contact with Earth. For 40 straight minutes, there was no radio signal, no telemetry, no way for mission control in Houston to know if the crew was alive or dead. The spacecraft had disappeared behind the far side of the moon, completely cut off from everything and everyone on the planet. During that silence, Christina Koch, Victor Glover, Reed Wiseman, and Jeremy Hansen watched Earth vanish behind the lunar horizon. They witnessed something only 24 humans have ever seen, and they were farther from home than any person in the history of our species. When the signal came back and Houston heard Commander Wiseman's voice crackle through the static, the room erupted. The crew was safe. The spacecraft was working, and for the first time in over half a century, humans were flying around the moon. But to understand how they got there and how close this mission came to never happening at all, we need to go back a few years, because this story almost ended before it started. In November 2022, NASA launched Artemis 1, an uncrewed test flight of the massive Space Launch System rocket and the Orion capsule. No humans aboard, just 3 mannequins collecting data. The rocket worked perfectly. Orion flew for 25.5 days, traveled 1.4 million miles, entered orbit around the moon, and splashed down in the Pacific Ocean on December 11, 2022, exactly 50 years to the day since Apollo 17's lunar landing. From the outside, it looked like a clean win for NASA. The media coverage was overwhelmingly positive. SLS had proven it could fly. Orion had proven it could survive deep space. Everything seemed on track for the crewed mission. There was just one problem, and NASA didn't talk about it publicly for a long time. When engineers pulled the capsule out of the water and started inspecting the heat shield, they found something alarming. More than 100 spots where chunks of the ablative material called AV coat had cracked and broken away during re-entry. This was way beyond what the models predicted. And this wasn't some minor cosmetic issue. The heat shield is the only thing standing between the crew and temperatures reaching 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit during re-entry. If it fails, there is no backup. It took NASA 2 full years to figure out what went wrong. The root cause, announced in December 2024, turned out to be almost absurdly ironic. The original Apollo-era AV coat formula was designed to stay permeable, allowing hot gases to vent through the material as it burned away. That's how ablative heat shields work. They're supposed to erode in a controlled way. The Artemis version had been reformulated with modern manufacturing processes, and somewhere in that reformulation, the material lost its permeability. During the Artemis 1 re-entry, the outer layer sealed up after the first atmospheric skip, trapping superheated gases underneath. The pressure built up, and the material blew apart. Apollo engineers knew about this permeability requirement decades ago. Somehow, that knowledge didn't make it into the new design. So NASA had a decision to make. Redesign the heat shield from scratch, which would take at least 18 more months, or fly the existing shield with a modified re-entry profile that kept the material in its safe temperature range. They chose to fly. Instead of the planned skip re-entry, where the capsule bounces off the upper atmosphere before diving back in, NASA switched to a steeper, lofted entry that cut heat shield exposure from about 20 minutes down to 13.5 minutes. The trade-off was higher G-forces on the crew, up to 3.9 Gs, and less flexibility to adjust where the capsule would land. Not everyone agreed with this plan. Dr. Charles Camarda, a former NASA astronaut who flew the first space shuttle mission after the Columbia disaster, wrote an open letter to NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman in January 2026. Camarda estimated a 1 in 20 chance of failure and directly invoked the institutional failures that led to both Challenger and Columbia. He warned that NASA was repeating the same pattern of normalizing risk that had killed 14 astronauts. Dr. Danny Olivas, another former astronaut on the independent review team, described the Artemis 2 heat shield as deviant and not the heat shield NASA would want to give its astronauts. He did add that NASA had thoroughly analyzed the problem, Commander Wiseman publicly backed the decision, saying if they stuck to the new reentry path, the heat shield would be safe. So there is your tension. 4 humans about to ride a capsule with a known heat shield flaw around the moon and back. Some of the smartest people in the space community openly disagree about whether it is safe. And NASA says they have done the math and it is going to work. This was not some abstract engineering debate happening in a conference room. This played out publicly in the weeks before launch, in real time, on social media and cable news. Retired astronauts gave interviews about whether the crew was being put at unacceptable risk. NASA officials pushed back with data and simulations. And the 4 crew members themselves sat through press conferences, being asked point blank if they trusted the heat shield with their lives. Now, who exactly volunteered for this ride? The crew was announced on April 3rd, 2023, and each of them was making history just by being there. Commander Reed Wiseman is a 50-year-old Navy captain from Baltimore. He is a former F-14 Tomcat pilot with 2 combat deployments to the Middle East. NASA selected him in 2009 from 3,500 applicants. He had already spent 165 days aboard the International Space Station, and he served as chief of the astronaut office. Here is the part that rarely gets mentioned. His wife, Carol Taylor Wiseman, a nurse, died of cancer in 2020. He had been raising their 2 daughters alone ever since. During the mission's lunar flyby, Wiseman proposed naming an unnamed far-side crater Carol in her honor. That alone is enough to make you tear up. Pilot Victor Glover was born in Pomona, California. He is a Navy aviator with over 3,000 flight hours across 40 different aircraft and 24 combat missions. He has 3 master's degrees. He flew on SpaceX's first operational Crew Dragon mission, and he spent 168 days on the International Space Station. His call sign is Ike, which stands for I Know Everything. On Artemis 2, Glover became the first black person to travel beyond low Earth orbit. To keep perspective on the significance of that, he listened to Gil Scott-Heron's 1970 spoken word piece, Whitey on the Moon, every single Monday. It is a poem written when the original Apollo program was spending billions while black communities struggled with poverty. 56 years later, Glover was the one going to the moon. Mission specialist Christina Koch is an electrical engineer who spent 3.5 years working in Antarctica and the Arctic before joining NASA. Her previous International Space Station mission lasted 328 consecutive days, the longest single spaceflight by a woman at the time. She conducted the first 3 all-female spacewalks with Jessica Meir. On Artemis 2, Koch became the first woman to fly beyond low Earth orbit and travel around the moon. Mission specialist Jeremy Hansen is a colonel in the Royal Canadian Air Force, a former CF-18 fighter pilot, and the most experienced rookie in the history of space travel. Before Artemis 2, Hansen had never been to space. His first spaceflight was a trip around the moon. He became the first non-American to travel beyond low Earth orbit, and the first Canadian ever assigned to a lunar mission. His mission patch was designed by Anishinaabe artist Henry Guimond, referencing the teachings of the 7 grandfathers. Hansen trained for nearly 3 years for this flight, running Orion simulator sessions, failure drills, suited rehearsals at Kennedy Space Center, and medical emergency scenarios. The rocket they rode was the Space Launch System, standing 322 feet tall at Kennedy Space Center Launch Complex 39B. To give you a sense of scale, that is taller than the Statue of Liberty from base to torch tip. At liftoff, the SLS generates 8.8 million pounds of thrust, making it the most thrust-heavy rocket ever to carry humans. 15% more raw push than Saturn V that sent Apollo astronauts to the moon, though with less payload capacity. The core stage alone is 212 feet tall, the largest rocket stage ever built, powered by 4 RS-25 engines, the same engine design that flew on every space shuttle mission. These burn through 730,000 gallons of supercooled liquid hydrogen and oxygen. 2 5-segment solid rocket boosters, each 1 segment more than the shuttle used, provide over 75% of all that liftoff thrust. That is 3.6 million pounds each, burning for about 2 minutes before separating and falling into the Atlantic Ocean. Unlike the shuttle boosters, these are not recovered. They are gone. On top of all that sits the Orion capsule built by Lockheed Martin with 316 cubic feet of habitable space, roughly the size of a large van for 4 people for 10 days. Not exactly roomy. The crew named their capsule Integrity, and it was packed with 32 cameras and imaging devices. The European service module, built by Airbus in Bremen, Germany for the European Space Agency, handles propulsion, power, and life support with 33 engines and 4 solar array wings spanning 19 meters. 10 European countries, over 20 prime contractors, and more than 100 suppliers contributed to building each module. This was an international effort from the bolts up. And sitting on top of everything, the launch abort system. A tower 44 feet tall with a solid rocket motor that generates 400,000 pounds of thrust and can accelerate the crew capsule from 0 to 500 miles per hour in 2 seconds. If something goes catastrophically wrong during launch, this system rips the crew away from the exploding rocket. It was fully armed for the first time on Artemis 2. On Artemis 1, since nobody was aboard, only the jettison motor was active. Getting to launch day was its own odyssey. Artemis 2 was originally supposed to fly around 2023, then it slipped to 2025, then April 2026. The heat shield investigation ate up most of that time, along with battery problems in Orion's abort system and life support issues. At one point, NASA even had to swap out one of the 4 RS-25 main engines on the core stage. Engine E2063 developed a hydraulics leak in its oxygen valve and was replaced with engine E2061 in April 2025. On a rocket this complex, changing an engine is not like changing a tire, it is months of work. Even the final weeks were chaotic. The SLS rolled to the pad on January 18, 2026, traveling the 4 miles from the vehicle assembly building on NASA's massive crawler transporter at about 1 mile per hour. The first wet dress rehearsal on February 2nd revealed a liquid hydrogen leak and a faulty hatch valve. These are the exact kinds of problems you run rehearsals to find, but they are also the kinds that delay launches by weeks. A second attempt on February 19th succeeded. Then on February 21st, just when things seemed to be on track, a helium flow issue in the upper stage forced NASA to roll the entire 322-foot rocket back to the vehicle assembly building for repairs. Another 4-mile drive at walking speed, another round of work, another delay. They did not get back to the pad until March 20th, delayed an extra day by high winds on the Florida coast. The flight readiness review on March 12th confirmed April 1st as the target date with backup windows through April 6th. On April 1st, 2026, at 6:35 p.m. Eastern Time, the SLS launched on the first attempt. The solid rocket boosters separated 2 minutes in at about 30 miles altitude. The launch abort system jettisoned after clearing the atmosphere. The upper stage placed Orion into a high Earth orbit. The crew then performed something genuinely cool, a proximity operations demonstration where they manually piloted Orion near the spent upper stage. This was practice for the future Artemis 3 mission, where Orion will need to rendezvous and dock with SpaceX's Starship lunar lander. The next day, April 2nd, the service module's main engine fired for 5 minutes and 49 seconds, the trans-lunar injection burn that sent them out of Earth orbit and toward the Moon. This was the first time since Apollo 17 in December 1972 that humans had left Earth orbit, a gap of 53 years and 4 months. And here is a wild detail. That single engine burn was the only time the main engine fired during the entire mission. Every other maneuver used smaller auxiliary thrusters. One burn, and the Moon's gravity did the rest. Over the next 3 days, the crew settled into deep space life. Koch and Hansen set up the water dispenser, firefighting masks, and the toilet. Speaking of which, a chemical reaction in the urine venting system clogged a filter on day 3. Not exactly glamorous, but that's what a test flight is for. Koch and Hansen each completed 41-minute manual control evaluations, hand-flying the spacecraft through different thruster configurations. Only one of 3 planned course corrections was needed, because Orion's trajectory was already incredibly accurate. Then came April 6th, the big day, the reason everything else existed. Orion swung around the far side of the Moon at its closest approach of about 4,067 miles above the surface, traveling nearly 61,000 miles per hour relative to Earth. As the spacecraft crossed behind the Moon, the 40-minute communications blackout began. No radio, no telemetry, no lifeline to Houston, just 4 people in a capsule the size of a van, completely alone in the universe. During that blackout, the crew experienced something that no words on a screen can properly convey. They watched Earth, the only home any human has ever known, disappear behind the gray lunar horizon, an event called Earthset. They saw the far side's alien, cratered landscape stretching below them, a terrain so different from the near side that early scientists thought it might be a different world. The far side has almost no smooth, dark plains. It is just craters on craters on craters, all the way to the horizon. And then came the eclipse. From their position behind the Moon, the crew witnessed a roughly 54-minute total solar eclipse, watching the sun's corona blaze around the Moon's dark disk from a vantage point no human had occupied in over 5 decades. They studied it, they photographed it, they watched for meteoroid impact flashes on the lunar surface below, and they existed for nearly an hour in a state of complete isolation from the rest of humanity. At 1:56 p.m. Eastern Time, the crew reached their maximum distance from Earth, approximately 252,756 miles. That broke Apollo 13's 1970 record by about 4,100 miles. 4 people were simultaneously farther from home than any human being has ever been, the most people in deep space at one time in all of history. During the flyby, Glover made his deliberate echo of Apollo 8. Where the Apollo 8 crew famously read from Genesis during their 1968 Christmas Eve lunar orbit, Glover quoted Jesus' commandment to love your neighbor as yourself, a deeply personal choice from the first black astronaut to reach the Moon. The return trip took 4 days. 4 long days of coasting through the emptiness between the Moon and Earth, with the heat shield question growing louder with every passing hour. A small helium leak in the European service module was discovered and monitored throughout. Engineers on the ground tracked gas flow rates around the clock. The leak was not dangerous, but it prompted extra testing of the propulsion system that led NASA to cancel a planned manual piloting demonstration and a radiation shielding experiment. Play it safe now, push the science to later missions. The crew tested compression suits designed to keep blood pressure stable during re-entry G-forces. Without them, blood can pool in the legs after days of weightlessness, causing astronauts to black out at the worst possible time. They exercised daily on a small flywheel to keep their muscles from atrophying, and they gradually packed up the cabin for splashdown, stowing loose equipment, securing anything that could become a projectile under 3.9 Gs, and reviewing their emergency procedures one more time. On day 9, Koch and the crew performed final checks on their Orion crew survival system suits, the bright orange pressure suits they would wear during re-entry. The suits are the last line of defense if the cabin depressurizes. Hansen performed a final inspection of the capsule's navigation alignment. Everything was nominal, everything was ready, and now there was nothing left to do but wait for the atmosphere to arrive. And then came the moment everyone had been dreading. Re-entry. The part where the heat shield would either prove the engineers right or prove Dr. Camarda right. There was no middle ground. On April 10th, the service module separated from the crew capsule. It tumbled away and burned up in the atmosphere, its job done. At 7:53 p.m. Eastern, Orion hit the top of Earth's atmosphere at 400,000 feet, traveling 25,000 miles per hour, Mach 35, faster than a bullet from a rifle. The heat shield's surface climbed to approximately 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to melt steel twice over, and then a 6-minute communications blackout descended as superheated plasma surrounded the capsule, ionizing the air and cutting off all radio signals. 6 minutes of silence. NASA mission controllers in Houston staring at blank screens. The whole world watching a live feed that showed absolutely nothing. The same heat shield material that had crumbled unexpectedly on Artemis 1, the modified re-entry trajectory that critics had publicly questioned. Families of the crew sitting in a viewing area, waiting. This was the moment. The crew experienced up to 3.9 Gs, nearly 4 times their own body weight pressing them into their seats. 2 drogue parachutes deployed at about 23,400 feet to stabilize the capsule. 3 massive main parachutes, each one 116 feet in diameter, opened at 5,400 feet, billowing orange and white against the darkening Pacific sky, slowing the capsule to 17 miles per hour. And at 8:07 p.m. Eastern Time on April 10, 2026, Orion splashed down in the Pacific Ocean off the coast of San Diego within 1 mile of the target. The heat shield had held. Commander Wiseman reported 4 Green crew members. The USS John P. Murtha, a Navy amphibious transport dock, conducted the recovery. It was the first time the U.S. Navy had recovered a crewed NASA capsule since the Apollo-Soyuz mission in 1975. The heat shield showed expected divots and cracking in the post-flight inspection. NASA confirmed the modified trajectory had worked as designed. They also confirmed 3 issues needing resolution before Artemis 3. The heat shield needs a full redesign with more permeable avicoat, a service module valve needs to be redesigned, and that toilet venting problem needs a fix. Now here's where the bigger picture gets really interesting. 5 weeks before Artemis 2 even launched, NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman, the billionaire astronaut appointed by President Trump, dropped a bombshell restructuring of the entire Artemis program. The next mission, Artemis 3, was supposed to be the lunar landing, the one where astronauts would actually walk on the moon for the first time since 1972. Isaacman downgraded it to an orbital test mission, no landing, just testing the rendezvous between Orion and SpaceX's Starship lander in low Earth orbit. The actual first landing got pushed to Artemis 4, targeting early 2028. And the Lunar Gateway, the space station that was supposed to orbit the moon with hardware already built by multiple international partners, was flat out canceled. It was replaced by a $20 billion plan for a permanent lunar surface base called Ignition. And looming behind all of this is China. The Chinese space program is targeting a crewed lunar landing before 2030 using their Long March 10 rocket, which successfully completed a test launch on February 11, 2026, less than 2 months before Artemis 2 launched. China's approach is different from NASA's. They plan to use 2 rockets per lunar mission, one carrying the crew in a capsule called Mengzhou, and one carrying the Lanyue lander. The 2 vehicles would rendezvous in lunar orbit. China is also planning a permanent lunar research station with Russia by 2035. Isaacman framed the stakes bluntly, saying this is not the time for delay because falling behind could shift the balance of power on Earth. That is not subtle. That is a new administrator openly treating the moon as strategic territory. The Artemis program has now cost an estimated $93 billion. Each space launch system launch runs about $4.1 billion. For context, SpaceX developed the Falcon Heavy for roughly $500 million total, and they are targeting $10 to $100 million per Starship flight. Critics have called the Space Launch System the Senate Launch System because its budget is spread across contractors in politically powerful congressional districts. Former Senator Bill Nelson said back in 2010 that if NASA could not build a rocket for $11.5 billion, they should close up shop. Space Launch System development has since blown past $23 billion. So where does that leave us? Artemis 2 proved that the Space Launch System and Orion can safely carry humans to the moon and back. That matters. The heat shield worked with the modified trajectory. The life support systems kept 4 people alive for 10 days. The navigation was so precise that only 1 of 3 planned course corrections was needed. But it also showed that the Artemis program is still wrestling with cost overruns, technical debt, and the institutional pressure to launch even when serious concerns remain unresolved. The heat shield still needs a redesign. The toilet still needs fixing. The next step in the program has already been downgraded, and the timeline for actually landing on the moon keeps stretching further into the future. What stays with you, though, are the human moments. Reed Wiseman, a single father who lost his wife to cancer, floating behind the moon and asking to name a crater after her. Victor Glover, the first black person to journey to the moon, quoting scripture from deep space while carrying the weight of history. Christina Koch, who survived winters at the South Pole, becoming the first woman to see Earth disappear behind the lunar horizon. And Jeremy Hansen, a Canadian farm kid turned fighter pilot making his very first space flight, a trip around the moon. At the Houston welcome ceremony after the mission, Hansen looked at the crowd and said something that stuck with people. He told them that when they looked up at the crew, they were not looking at astronauts. They were looking at a mirror reflecting themselves, and if they liked what they saw, they should look deeper, because it was you. Wiseman, the commander, added his own reflection. He said that before you launch, it feels like the greatest dream on Earth. But when you are actually out there, 250,000 miles from home, you just want to get back to your families and your friends. The perspective does not make you feel grand, it makes you feel grateful. After 53 years, humans have returned to the moon's neighborhood. The question is not whether we can go back. The question is whether we have the focus, the funding, and the courage to actually stay, and whether the next generation of kids watching rocket launches on their phones will be the ones who finally walk on Mars. If you want to go deeper on the Artemis program and where it's headed next, that video is right here. Subscribe if you are not already. We cover the biggest stories in space every week. I will see you in that one.